The French president has said this. Unfortunately, the information we have confirms to us the plane came down and is lost.
That's right. And that is why the French prosecutors have also launched an investigation, not based on the fact that they know it's terror. They just want to know what happened.
That's right.
All right, let's bring in John Lucich. He is a licensed commercial pilot and a former state criminal investigator. Also, J.P. Tristani, a former pilot and aviation expert, and our terror expert, Dr. Sebastian Gorka.
Author of Defeating Jihad.
All right, John, let's start with you. What do you think happened?
Well, you know, the most probable thing is terrorism. When you take a look at all the reports that are coming out, flames in the skies, it's had to be some catastrophic failure. But remember Air France 447 out of Rio de Janeiro? That airplane was falling apart in the sky, and still ACARs were spitting out all those messages, right?
Sure.
We have
I'm
no
sorry,
message.
would you just say? What was spinning out all
The
those?
ACAR system, the Aircraft Communications Reporting System.
So they got data.
They got
the ground
data.
got data
As
from
this
the
airplane
plane.
was going down,
Right.
they got data. This thing wasn't sending out anything. If a pilot's having a problem, remember, he's only 30, 40 minutes out of Cairo, he would start descending. They didn't see any descent in altitude. They just see this thing disappear, no messages being sent. It had to be some type of catastrophic failure. Because of the flames report, I got to think it blew up. So the most probable cause, because of all the problems that Egypt Air has been having, is got to be terrorism.
All right, well, Dr. Gorka is an expert, terrorism expert. He's written a book about this, travels countries, teaching others about how to look for signs of terrorism. Do you agree with John, Dr. Gorka?
I'd be cautious. I'd say, what are the signs? At the moment, the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle look as if it could be terrorism for multiple reasons. The destination, Cairo, the origination point, Paris, both very symbolically important for jihadis. Yes, the height at which it occurred, and most suspiciously of all, the fact that the Greek air traffic controllers lost contact with the crew long before the plane dropped off radar. That is very suspicious. If you add those things together, the height, the loss of contact, the origination point, the destination, it leans towards the likelihood of a terrorist attack,
Right.
but we must be cautious.
Hey, listen to this, JP. The Greek officials confirmed the aircraft was in Egyptian airspace and flying at 37,000 feet when it made sudden swerves. Could that be in reaction to a hit? Could that be a pilot doing that in today's era of automation?
It could be an explosive decompression that caused a total loss of control of the aircraft, and then you have an aircraft jinxing in the sky. So yes, that's a plausible thing. I would hesitate to say that the Greek ATC, from what I've read, Greek ATC handed them off the Egyptian ATC,
Right.
air traffic control. So right now, again, as I stated before, Egypt ATC could clear up one very definite thing. Did you have control? Did they check in with you? And he was still a few miles, about 50 miles away from the start of his descent point. I'm not really heading towards the terrorist business of blowing that aircraft out of the sky, because an explosive decompression could cause a major fracture and incapacitate the pilots from ever controlling that aircraft and eliminating all types of electronics, transmission, or communications from the aircraft. So there is weight, but like the good man just said, I'm very cautious about laying it on right now
It has
for
a great
terroristic.
safety record, and I don't see that as a probability. And remember, I didn't say that it was terrorism. I said it's,
Sure.
It's most likely probable.
And it's also, isn't it a little suspicious, though, just the fact that it was 10 miles into Egyptian airspace? You know, it had been flying all across Europe for the last 24 hours. Suddenly, 10 miles into it, boom, it's gone.
It's gone right off the screen, not descending, not anything. And nobody can explain what it happens. We have to wait till the end of what happens. But what makes it worse is that we're dealing with a government that doesn't want to release anything. And that's a problem.
Just so you know, our Secretary of State landed there Wednesday, obviously not knowing this tragedy was going to take place. They didn't let the press go with the Secretary of State because they didn't want the press asking this Egyptian government any questions about who's been jailed. The government's a good friend to us, but not necessarily to the press.
Right.
But Dr. Gorka, in the big picture, remember what happened when the Russian airline wanted to run across the Turkish border. They took it out. I'm not saying that that's happened here, but the scenario does look similar. As they got to a certain area, could they have taken it out by mistake? Is that possible with this in this age of technology?
Well, governments have the capacity to do this. You can't do that with a shoulder-launched missile. It's flying way too high. It's 37,000 feet. But again, if you look at the circumstantial evidence, this is suspicious. The A320, very reliable airframe. This particular plane is only 12 years old. That's nothing in terms of aircraft longevity. And on top of that, let's not forget the Russian airliner that was blown out of the sky over Sinai, over Egypt just 7 months ago, which afterwards was claimed by ISIS. So again, we have to wait, we have to get more evidence, but if you had to make a call right now, it is very suspicious.
That Russian aircraft being blown out of the sky has not been definitively stated. The Russians have stated it. I heard President Obama give it a possibility, but no one has come up with any explosive residue on any report that I have ever seen that tells me that that Russian aircraft was in fact blown out of the sky.
And John, that's going to be one of the problems going forward, because this plane fell into the Mediterranean. And so, forensically, trying to figure out what went wrong, that's going to be hard.
Well, when we get the black box, we'll know exactly what went on. And I believe you're still going to get residue off that, depending upon how long that aircraft sits underwater, right?
And John, you're an investigator. Someone's going to come forward and say they saw something. There is a captain of a ship in the Mediterranean at the time who said he saw something like a fireball in the sky. We're going to hear from more people, aren't we, that come out? Because this happened in the middle of the night. If there was fire involved, if there was an explosion, people saw something or heard something, right?
You certainly would. You would hear an explosion. And if it were any type of missile similar to the Book missile that could reach up to 65,000 feet, yeah, that explosive effect would be clearly seen, and it would also be spotted on satellites.
What's the Book
that
missile?
flare. The Book missile is the one that took out the
Russian
Malaysian aircraft over the Ukraine.
Who would have that in that neighborhood?
That's exactly what I would say. Beside that, that's a very huge, it's a truck. So you would either have that somewhere on some kind of ship, or you could have it as a weapon similar on one of their destroyers. You could have an accidental discharge of a weapon of that type. I lower that probability. I'm not so much in haste to stand there and say, yes, it was an inadvertent launch of a missile that went up and took this aircraft down. That's a little bit of a stretch for me.
The treasure trove of information is going to come from the voice cockpit reporter and also the flight data recorder.
If they had time to speak. If they had time to speak. But if they did not have time, if it was a catastrophic failure, where even in explosive decompression, and they had no time to don their masks.
You should be able to hear that explosion going off on the voice recorder.
You'll hear it hissing, yes.
As far as individuals are concerned, I'm thinking if you're on a plane and you're that high up, the internet is still working at that point. Do you think?
Well, they're dealing through satellite.
Mm-hmm. But I'm talking about passengers on the plane, writing to their loved ones back home, sending emails, that kind of stuff. Yep. Would that come forward eventually?
You would not have any time to do that. If you had an explosive decompression and that aircraft goes all the way up to 37,000, you got 30 seconds of cognitive skill. In a minute, you're unconscious. It's all over.
Yeah, but if it was a fire, you would have time to put out a mayday.
Yes.
If
there was a fire on board, the pilots would have time to radio that.
That's
and there
true.
was no radio at all.
Yeah.
ACARS didn't send anything out. That tells me it was some type of quick, catastrophic failure.
Pilots historically will fight an airplane all the way down to the ground and be transmitting and talking because that is our training.
Yes.
Nothing came out of this individual. Nothing, which means all communication, all electricity, pilots incapacitated, all finished on one blow.
Very quick.
Gone.
Yeah. Dr. Gorka, France's spy chief came out on Thursday with a warning. He warned of an impending action or attack, some sort of new form of attack, he referred to it as, coming perhaps from ISIS. Do you think these two events could be related?
They could be. There's nothing to say that they can't be. Look at what we've had in the last few months. We've had double attacks in Paris. We've had Brussels. Look at the manifest of where this plane has been. It's not unusual for an Egypt Air flight to do this, but this plane has been everywhere in the last few days. Brussels, Luxor, Eritrea, Casablanca. Some of those airports are not up to Western standards of security. So is there something new being smuggled on board on that aboard that aircraft, that is a distinct possibility.
And Dr. Gorka, the other thing, when you pressure ISIS, instead of just going down, they lash out. Hence, making progress in Baghdad, in Mosul, they start bombing Baghdad. Every time they feel like they're being pressured and pushed into a corner, you get some type of eruption. Even it could be San Bernardino, and it could be Brussels.
Right. So, Brian, we're absolutely right. We're squeezing them, or our local allies are. They're losing some territory. So what do? You have to prove your relevance. And an attack of this nature, if it is an attack, could be a great way for them to have a cheap propaganda coup to reestablish their relevance as the jihadi masterminds.
John, let me ask you a question. As Dr. Gorka just detailed, this particular flight, 24 hours prior, had been all over Europe and Africa as well. What is standard operating procedure when a plane goes into an airport and they take the stuff off, the cargo, if there is cargo, and the baggage? Do they send the dogs in just to see if there's any, somebody left something in a suspicious
first of all,
area?
there was no cargo that was reported on this airplane.
No cargo.
And nothing dangerous.
And they're going to be looking at just not only the places, but also the crew. Remember, it wasn't too long ago where a flight attendant tried to sneak 70 pounds of cocaine onto the airplane through LAX, right? So it could be with the crew, it could be with the passengers, it could come through any one of these ports. These are all areas that they have to explore in order to find out exactly what had happened. But again, I got to reiterate, I think most of the important stuff is going to come from the flight, the black box.
So, JP, what do you say to passengers who are getting on international flights today, or pilots that are flying planes?
You had 100,000 flights a day, 37 million a year on the airlines. And so you have this one incident, what I would say, 1 in 100,000 today in a 24-hour period. So I would say to them that the probabilities are on the side for a very safe flight. Sit back and relax and enjoy the flight.
But one is way too much as it is.
Right.
We had more than just one.
And
always
look
that
what's
way.
going on with the Russians who are on vacation leaving Egypt. That blows up. The Malaysian flight was still looking for debris. We don't have any answers on this. This seems to be happening a lot, and I'm wondering why it takes so long to get answers.
Well, because we have to find the airplane, number one, right? We have absolutely no witnesses because they're all dead by now, most likely, most probably. No one's, in my estimation, is going to survive coming out of an explosive situation at 37,000 feet.
Sure. One other thing, and I mentioned this earlier, I think it was back in 1999, an Egypt Air flight took off from Los Angeles over the Atlantic and went straight down because the pilot committed suicide.
Right.
If this were a suicidal situation, would the plane still have been talking electronically, sending data back?
Well, first of all, you would have seen the airplane descending. In that particular case, and it was a while ago, so I don't remember, I believe he locked the captain out of the cockpit and then dove the airplane down.
And you could hear the guy knocking on the door.
On radar, you would actually see that airplane descending, okay? That wasn't the case here. At 37,000 feet, no longer. Gone.
Which makes you
in any
believe
case,
it was
the
an
aircraft
explosion.
does not descend on its own. It has to be cleared down. The pilot does not say, I'm descending. No, he has to get clearance to descend, which means he has to communicate, and he's communicating with Egypt ATC.
Yeah, but if he was going to commit suicide,
he doesn't care about breaking the rules.
No, he doesn't. And even if he shuts off the transponder, that's only secondary radar. Primary radar would still be painting that aircraft coming down.
And don't forget that other pilot who was suffering depression locked himself into the cockpit and smashed into a mountain.
Germanwings.
That's right. There's way too much of this. And you know what? Innocent people are getting hurt for someone to make a political statement if that's what this is.
Dr. Gorka, when you woke up this morning, what went through your mind with all of your experience?
Instantly, what I do is I try and teach our armed forces, our agents, to understand the enemy. And if you read the jihadi manuals, if you read Al-Qaeda's magazine Inspire, if you read ISIS's magazine Dabiq, they are very clear. They are explicit. You will target high concentrations of civilians who are unable to protect themselves. They want symbolic effect. They want fear to spread as wide as possible. That's why we saw the kinds of attacks we've seen in Paris at the stadium, at Brussels, at the airport. So, if this is a terrorist attack, it fits perfectly into the mold of spreading fear and attacking those who cannot defend themselves. So again, let's wait for the evidence. But when I woke up this morning, I said, oh dear, this fits a pattern, and it is a jihadi pattern.
He's right, and you know what? Our top leaders can't even say the word Islamic terrorist, you know, and that's a
I
problem.
haven't
'cause we're not
noticed. Is
recognizing
that true?
them.
I'm only kidding.
How is this going to affect the political season?
Well, again, it's
Big.
going to bring out the point of what the doctor is saying, that these type of people have innovative ways to attack the West. And what they're looking for
They're
is
obsessed
any
with
chance
aviation.
because you get a big bang for your buck,
Sure.
if that may be said in this tragic circumstance. And so they look for these type of things, and of course they are pushing on these magazines that he's quoting, the lone wolf. Take it onto yourself. Don't work with the cell. Just go out and do it and create panic.
Well,
that's
Look
what you
at,
want.
look
Don't
at the
calm,
last few
stay panic.
years.
Real quick.
Look at the last few years. We had the shoe bomber, Richard Reed. We had the liquid bomb plot out of the UK. Then we had the printer cartridge plot. Your guest is absolutely right.
Underwear bomb.
Terrorists are in underwear bomber. Thank you, Brian. They are innovative. Our challenge is to outthink them.
All right.
They're very clever.
Dr. Gorka, John, and JP, thank you very much.
Thank you.